Hi everyone. On today's podcast with Buy with My, we have Sharianne, who is going to assist us in learning all about international mortgages and how it works in Barbados. Thanks for joining, Sharianne.
Yes, I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So we're gonna just hop straight into it and get an idea as to what international mortgages, how it works, how can our clients get it. As many of my viewers know that the majority of my clients are from overseas, so we're just focusing on the international mortgage aspect and how Sharianne can assist these clients. All right, so Sharianne, firstly, you just a bit let us know a bit about you and your career experience and as to why you are the expert and why I'm coming to you. I know I'm coming to you, but if you could tell everybody why we're coming to you to learn more about this.
Yeah, no problem. So I've actually been in banking for about more than 20 years. I've spent my entire banking career in credit, specifically with lending from small business lending to retail. So I kind of have a lot of experience in banking, credit, financing. I'm also a chartered accountant, certified internal auditor, and a certified mortgage consultant. So I have quite a bit of experience, specifically with non-resident financing as well on the island.
Fantastic. So you are the person ready to speak to about
Yes.
non-resident financing. I like to call it
Yeah.
international mortgages. It's my term for it, but the correct term is really non-resident financing. So what is non-resident financing and how does it work in Barbados?
Well, so non-resident financing simply means that you're obtaining a mortgage or a property loan in Barbados when you're not
Mhm.
living on the island full time or you don't hold tax residency. So it's a specialized form of lending. It caters to international buyers, very similar to the term that you just used, from
Mhm.
Barbadians living overseas to investors in Canada, US, UK, and across the Caribbean. And in terms of how it works, there are some key points to it. Loan to value tends to be between 50 to 80% of the property
Mhm.
value, depending on the Pacific bank that you're approaching with appetite. The down payment is often higher than residents. So you're typically looking at between 20 to 50%. The application process, it involves proof of income, tax returns, employment letters, typical KYC information that you will have to submit to any bank, which is like IDs,
Mhm.
those sort of things, and then a full
Yeah.
foreign credit report, right?
Okay.
Most banks here offer financing in two currencies, Barbados and US dollar currency.
Let's see.
So those are the
Mhm.
two only currencies you can get it, which means it's ideal for clients, overseas clients who are earning foreign currency. So non-resident financing makes it possible to invest in Barbados without liquidating assets or transferring
Mhm.
all your savings over here. It's a bridge that lets you build wealth in paradise while keeping your financial base where you are, basically.
Okay, so that was a good recap. So we can kind of deep dive into it more. So one thing I'm interested in, I do have a base understanding, but maybe you can kind of let me know more about it. Is the legal requirements? You just mentioned it, the KYC, the IDs, and I think you just said a credit report. Are those that's the three things that you generally need?
Yeah,
Any other
those are the
forms?
three
Anything else?
basic stuff. I mean, every bank has its own specific list of documents that they would need, but I would say
Right.
that those are the key documents that you find that are constantly asked by most banks.
Right. And with the credit report, as a side question, because I get this question a lot too with a lot of my
Mhm.
clients. What's the expiration on that information? I believe is it like 3 months that they would have to, let's say it expires, it would have to reapply within 3 months, or is it 6 months or something like this?
It depends on the bank. Some banks, they
Okay.
don't mind it being 3 months. Other banks
Okay.
are 6 months. So you will have to kind of cater it to the bank, but you're going to find worst case scenario. We can use the 3 months as a gauge as to,
Okay.
the timelines for the credit report,
Okay.
basically.
All right. So what are the types of loans or mortgages that are available to non-residents?
Well, there are different types. You have the typical standard residential mortgage, which you find that a lot of non-residents get if they're just trying to purchase a second home, like a vacation home. You also have the
Also
other
have
type, which tends to be like investment or rental property mortgages, where there may be a combination of both in terms of the borrower might be looking to not only use the property while they're on island, but also rent it out
mhm,
when they're not. So it's sort of like an investment property. The banks really don't focus too much on what the property is used for. And the
okay,
financing can be even it can be either in your personal name or it could be in a company's name.
okay. Is there any differences if it's in a personal name or in a company name in terms of the application?
No, not the application process. No. The only thing that really changes is maybe at the end when you're trying to put all the legal work into place. Like, for example, the commitment letter, you have to then supply the bank with your company's
Company
incorporation
name.
documents and the bylaws
Right.
just to kind of show that everything is in order there.
Established
Um,
and
yeah. And that's
right.
basically it.
With the company, because I do get this again, a lot of this is gonna come up as we have a conversation because I get questions all the time. Is it a case that it has to be a local company, or if they have I had a client who has a company in America and he wanted to have like a subsidiary of some sorts here in Barbados. Does it really matter how it's set up in terms of which type of company?
I think that question really would more depend on your client's tax situation, right?
Right.
So
Right.
everybody's going to come to the island and they're going to have their own personal tax advisors at home because taxes are very specific to country in terms of what's required in the country that you're
Yes.
coming from, right? So you're going to find that some borrowers, their tax advisors will say they want a company, but it has to be registered as an external company. So there's a link back to a
Yes.
parent company in the where they're from. And then there are others that are pretty much comfortable with just opening a local company and using it as a vehicle
Right.
to hold the property, right? The main difference
Mhm.
between, and then we also have the other more complex one, which is the BVI structure. Because you do have
Yes.
some persons who have the company initially in the BVI, and then there's a company here registered to hold it.
Yeah.
Major differences would be you have to be mindful of the fact that the more complex you make these company structures, the more
Mhm.
information is going to be required, right? So obviously, if you make an external company, the bank could ask you some very invasive questions when it comes to the ultimate parent company, because banks
Right.
also have to manage that anti-money
Manage their
laundering. Yes, yeah,
yes,
exactly,
exactly.
right? So I find that most tax advisors are very comfortable with their clients just opening a local bank account and having the property held in there.
Okay. Yeah, that makes 100% sense. Yeah, that anti-money laundering is becoming a really big factor, and the more
Yeah,
complex you
it
make
is.
it, it might prove more difficult. Fair enough.
Yeah, yeah, for
All right.
sure.
One other aspect with the international mortgage, non-resident financing question I get all the time too is returning nationals or CARICOM nationals. Are there any differences or benefits being a Bajan who moved overseas to the UK and coming back? A lot of them ask if they can still get the same percentage and rate that a Bajan would
Yeah.
get. Same thing with CARICOM nationals. I get that question quite a lot.
Yeah. So I get that question pretty often too.
Yeah.
Definitely, if you have a Bajan living overseas, you want to know that it's not the typical foreign investor kind of coming in. You're sometimes looking
Hmm.
for a home. You might be looking for a home for a family member to place them in, or your retirement home at the end, right? So it's sort of like a planning. There's only really one bank on the island that adjusts their injection amount if you're Barbadian, right? So, and that differs from a pure non-resident client, as I would say, which is somebody who
Right.
doesn't have residency on the island. So if you are a Barbadian living overseas, the minimum deposit I've seen is 20%, right? I think what borrowers have to remember is that a bank is going to structure a product based on the risks that is associated with the product, right? So
Yeah.
you're still technically somebody who's not residing on the island. So if there's
Hmm.
any issues with the loan, the bank will have to spend quite a bit of money to basically call on
Yeah.
the facility, because there's a lot of you have to basically contact the client, you have to show evidence that you've been constantly following with the client. And if you're not in
Right.
Barbados, That's even more costly, right? And some of this documentation actually has to be registered. Like you just can't just send them a letter and say, well, hopefully you got
Yeah,
it, right? So all of that is the reason why there's such a significant difference between residents and non-resident financing. But just to answer your question, yes, there is a bank on the island that caters to Barbadians looking to reinvest, and they've allowed that percentage to be 20%, which is pretty amazing.
that's really fantastic. I actually didn't even know that, so that's really good because we have a lot of people who obviously they went overseas for opportunities and they just want to come back home. They want a piece of the rock.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
it's good to know that there is an opportunity for them to benefit, to have a additional benefit basically to that. Oh, okay,
yeah,
great.
yep.
You also mentioned the difference in currencies, the USD versus the Barbadian currency in terms of you can obtain a loan in either currency. Any differences as to why one person might choose USD over the Barbados or Barbados over the USD?
Yeah, for sure. Right now we're in an environment where the US financing is a lot more costly than the local currency financing, right? So, in a Barbados loan, you can get interest rate as low as 3.5 if your credit profile is amazing, right? So if you know you have that
Nice.
liquidity, you don't have any concerns
Yeah.
in your credit report, there's actually banks in Barbados that will lend to non-residents as low as 3.5%. So
Wow.
that obviously makes a big difference if somebody is
Mhm.
purchasing a property for investment purposes, because anytime
Mhm.
you're doing your calculations, you're always looking at returns, right? So you know that.
Crunching down the numbers. Yeah.
Exactly, right? So if you're trying to maximize your returns, then the interest
Yeah.
rate on the loan should be the lowest it could be, right? So, but when it comes to US financing now, you're going to pay a little bit more for it because it's a currency that we don't control on the island. So the local currency is regulated by the central bank here, so the interest rate tends to be pretty acceptable. But most banks, if they're lending you in US currency, they're going to have to be purchasing that fund from overseas, and it's going to be
Right.
impacted by the international market. So currently, you're going to find that banks are lending to the US currency at about 6.25, which is
Yeah.
almost double what the
Double.
local currency is. And
Yeah.
I mean, a year or two ago, it wasn't such a significant difference, right? But as I mentioned,
Mhm.
it's impacted by the international market, so the interest rate changes when the bank has to pay more to source that fund. So the local currency tends to be a lot more stable because the Barbados currency isn't traded on the international market, so we have more control over its fluctuation. But a lot of clients don't have a choice but to finance in US, especially if the seller is insisting on US currency
US
because
currency.
they want to move the company funds out of the country without any sort
Out of the
of central
country.
bank
Yes.
issues or anything.
Limitations. Yes, that's very true.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So the main, I would say, if I were to summarize, so the main benefit to having it in Barbados is that the interest rates are tend to be lower and it's not as volatile as if it was in the US
Exactly.
currency, right?
Yep. That's it.
Okay, right. With the potential drawback that if it's in Barbados dollars, it's just for the vendor to depending where the vendor is, if they want to take the money out or not. That's really the main drawback. Okay.
Yeah, another drawback too would be obviously you have to go through central bank to convert Barbados to US, right? And if
Yeah.
the seller hasn't registered their funds when they were purchasing the property,
Right.
then that's
Yeah.
where the issue comes because they may not get approval from central bank for the entire amount,
Okay.
depending on how large the
The
amount is,
right.
right? And then on top of that, anytime you're moving Barbados into US, you also have to accommodate for the foreign exchange fee, which is 2%, right? So that's a
2%.
cost that the sellers don't necessarily want to
Want
hold.
to absorb. Yeah.
Exactly. So I,
Yeah,
I, I
very
dealt
true.
with some
Okay.
deals where the buyers are willing to cover that 2% once they get the approval from central bank because the interest rate is so different. It's like such a drastic difference between the foreign currency and the Barbados currency that the buyer has said, listen, let me cover that 2% for you and let you take the funds in Barbados once you can get the approval from central bank to move the money from Barbados to US currency.
Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah, it can get really complex at those stages with the
It is.
currencies. I've had a few cases like that. Yeah, where there's a misunderstanding with the currency, and it worked out in the end, but it is a lot of hoops you have to. So having that clear and upfront in the beginning and
Yeah.
that's expectations, that's definitely
Yeah.
important.
I find I find that is one of the main concerns that I have in terms of non-residents coming into the island. If you don't have an advisor, like for you, you know, you have so much experience with dealing with international buyers that you can guide them
Yeah.
properly, right? But sometimes you may have some persons who they don't have a lot of experience. Like the majority of their clients are probably locals, and then they have this
Right.
one non-resident client and they're trying to
Yeah.
make sure that everything is done, but it's a very complex process, and you have
Yeah.
to be able to advise the customers properly, because if it isn't done properly, then you're going to find that when you own the property, you're going to have issues that you could have resolved from the beginning, and that's why it's
Right.
so important that you kind of work with the really knowledgeable
Right.
advisors when you're purchasing
Yeah.
property in Barbados.
I mean, that comes down to, of course, like the right agent, but the right
Yes.
attorney. And this is why I only work with specific
Hmm.
attorneys because
Yes.
they're able to be very clear and upfront and direct with
Yes.
the different scenarios that might actually come about.
Hmm.
Yeah. So with that in mind, knowing that they can get a mortgage in Barbados at potentially 3.5%, depending on their risk assessment, it then begs the question if they should try to get a mortgage back home or in Barbados. I've had clients who have had a mortgage back in the US or the UK. Maybe they refinance their home or something of the sort. I'm not too sure exactly how they even get it done. And didn't even know then that Barbados was even an option to look into for the international mortgage. Have you had any experiences like that where, the benefit was actually better in Barbados versus them trying to refinance their home back in the UK or US?
Yeah, for sure. So especially now because the US market is fluctuating so significantly.
So
Like
much.
right
Yeah.
now, I think the mortgage rate for some banks are offering at 6.25. So imagine if you are in the US and you even refinancing an existing home in the US and looking to draw equity from there, bring it into the
Hmm.
island and purchase a property in Barbados when you could have really just financed the property here at a much lower
Hmm.
interest rate,
Lower.
right? And
Right.
another thing too is that sometimes I've dealt with clients who their advisors have told them it is better to keep excess cash in an investment vehicle that was giving larger returns than the interest rate
Hmm.
on a mortgage. So you may not finance the entire purchase because you can't, right? You still have to do an injection amount,
Yeah.
but the amount that you're looking to finance, instead of selling an asset overseas or drawing down on equity, you can use the asset here and make it work for you basically. Let it hold its loan when it comes to the actual liability attached to the property,
Yeah.
because the mortgage here will take a charge over the property here. So I always tell non-residents that it is always best to allow the property here to hold its own in terms of a liability, because most banks overseas will not take charges over property here. They're going to have to take charges over your assets overseas. So why then allow an asset overseas to be tied up with an international asset
Yes.
here? Let it cover
Yeah.
its own, right?
Completely
And then
separate.
on
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly separate it, because then if for
Hmm.
example something later on happens and you need access to cash because you have your stuff tied up with a liability here, then you don't have that flexibility, right? So definitely, I see huge advantages of financing here as opposed to
Hmm.
trying to bring in funds by using, stuff that you have access to overseas and bringing in the funds.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. I didn't think about it from that perspective, but yeah, to separate it, to keep it clean and not tie
Yeah.
it up, and then you can be able to segment properly if you need to.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And then another thing too, Mia, is that because when I spoke earlier, I indicated I'm a chartered accountant and a tax expert,
mhm,
right? So part
Mhm.
of the advice that I normally give my clients, it's not just for Pacific in terms of the mortgage financing, but it's also setting them up afterwards. So you remember before we mentioned that the majority of clients are looking at these property purchases as investments, right? So if you're putting
Mhm.
it in a company account, because you're earning rental income on the island, you're going to have to do taxes. You're going to have to pay taxes. So in order to kind of like, tax management strategies, you can actually cast some of the interest, the mortgage interest against the rental income. And that too can also give you a benefit. So I found that a lot of my clients, they use that interest expense there, to
Right,
basically
towards like
cast exactly towards the
yes.
revenue. And then the tax
Yes.
liability at the end of the year is a lot less.
Oh, that is actually brilliant. It's so funny you just mentioned that, Sharianne, because I've been looking for I did not even know you were a tax expert. I've been looking for a tax expert to do a exact video like this because I know there are a lot of little things that I am not aware of, tax wise that I would really like to. You don't have to have a in-depth knowledge, but I have a base knowledge of it. So that is very, very interesting that you mentioned the interest expense. Okay. But yes, the taxes in Barbados you have to settle if it's your corporation taxes, if you have in a company, the levy, government levy for the short-term rentals.
Exactly. All
Um,
of those things
yeah,
are things that if you don't make sure that you're properly managing it while you have the property, then if you're looking to liquidate years down, you're going to have problems getting the money out of the island, where you're going to have a lot of
mhm,
fines, like simple things like annual returns. It's
mhm.
$100 a year. A lot
Dollars,
of people don't
easy
even
peasy.
know it doesn't, people don't even know it exists, right? But when you're
Yeah.
looking, you can actually have a case where your company could be knocked off of Kaipo's registration
Mm,
listing because you're not keeping that up to
not
date, right?
maintaining, right.
Exactly. So all of those things are things that go into managing a company when you're looking to purchase in Barbados. And once again, it is so important to work with advisors that know what they're doing because you don't want to find out things later on.
Later
I've
on.
had Yep, I've had clients who've had to dissolve companies because of that annual return because it just didn't make sense to even
Wow.
try to pay the funds because sometimes it can get the fees the can get pretty high. So then you have that issue, right? So you're just trying to manage everything. And like you mentioned, it's not that simple of a process advising an international client. There's so many different variables that have to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. And I find a lot of times too, I mean, luckily in Barbados, I would say the easier aspect for us is that we don't have to do a lot of the legal like work here as compared to the US. But there is a lot of information that is missed along the way. And many times I might not get a sale for a particular client, but they come back to me for property management and clearly want to do an investment property. So I'm like, okay, yep, yep. And they're like, oh, what are you talking about? I'm like, did no one mention that along the way? That, there are taxes that you have to cover for the short-term rentals.
Yep.
So yeah, yeah, you end up having to wear law hats, especially since I run a company, I have to wear a lot of different hats to advise clients.
Yeah.
I do have a question regarding the credit report or what is the ideal candidate? Like how is it assessed? I'm sure every bank has a different structure, possibly. Like what's the risk and how do they actually assess it? Do you have any insight into that?
For sure, the credit report is such an interesting document because, like I mentioned to you earlier, I'm a certified mortgage consultant out of the US, right? So I did my a lot of my research and my experiences based on what the US market can offer versus Barbados. And one of the key differences between the US and Barbados is that with US citizens, your credit report rating actually gets better when you have more credit, right? So I've
Yes.
found a lot of US citizens will come and they have a lot of credit cards and a lot of credit card
Right.
limits. But I have credit card limits of 100,000, but I only use 2,000 or I only use 10,000
Hmm.
in Barbados, there's a significant difference in how the banks here assess that, right? So in the US banks look at your outstanding balance, but in Barbados, the majority of banks here, they look at your limits, right?
Limits.
So
Ah,
here, if
okay.
like if you have a lot of limits, but your balance is
Right.
low. I face this battle so much with Americans because they're like, why are you talking
Yeah,
about
because
that?
they're like, they don't understand.
when I only have 2,000
I'm not even using
outstanding.
it. Yeah.
Exactly. And that is one of the
Oh,
major differences when you're looking at
that's
the credit report.
insightful.
I always tell clients
Right.
banks are not that particular about your credit scoring, but one of the things
Okay.
that they're going to be looking at is your limits, and they're going to be looking at if you have any bankruptcy history or any bad
Right.
credit, any notations at the end of the report that kind of gives that concern that you may have had issues paying loans in the past. Those are the real things that the banks here focus on, right? So sometimes I work with Americans and they may have to adjust their limits and they're like, my credit score is going to be impacted, right? But it's fine because once we take a screenshot of what your credit score looked like before, and then we are
Yes.
kind of like making these adjustments based on the approval requirements for the bank that you're working with, then the bank is
Yes.
aware that the adjustment was just taking place because of your
Of this
need to
particular.
reduce the limit. Yeah.
Right.
I know that there is one bank that we work with that does look at the outstanding balance, but you have to supply to them at least like a 6-month statement where they track the history and they make sure that you are consistently using that within that limit. So sometimes you may have a month that you peaked, that's impact you, right? So it's always best to just adjust the limits if you're trying to qualify for the mortgage.
Okay. So just to confirm or recap, so they're how they assess it for the US clients, the banks in Barbados, they assess it that the limit is actually like a liability because it's how much you could
Exactly.
potentially get to. Okay. What about
Exactly.
UK and Canada? Is that similar?
Same thing, same exact same thing. It's just
Okay.
that I find that we don't necessarily see it as much in the UK and in Canada, because I find in the US sometimes you even have banks that just give clients credit cards and then they're not even
Yes.
aware that the credit card is on their credit report. So
Yeah.
I would have a meeting with a client and the client would tell me my credit card limits are 10,000, but when I pull the credit report, it's more looking like 40 and 50,000 because there are some credit cards that they didn't even know were there or they forgot about, they
Right.
don't use. So sometimes there's a cleanup process that has to take place, but it tends to happen with anybody basically, US, UK, Canadian, but I know from specifically the US that their market credit rating is affected when they start to reduce their limits, because in America you are rewarded for having credit because it shows
Hmm.
you have access to 100, but you choose to only use 2, which means that you're somebody who's managing your expenses
In
properly.
control of it. Yeah.
Exactly. As the local banks here in Barbados see it as at any moment in time, you can max out
You
that
can.
credit card up to
Yeah. Yeah.
100,000. So what I'm going to
Okay.
do is I'm going to be very conservative and I'm going to assess you at that higher limit. And that's really
Okay.
the frame of mind behind it.
And that's why a lot of because I did have that with a client, and I think she had to end up closing some of her credit cards.
Yes,
So I
exactly.
was like, "Why you have to close it?" Okay, so that makes sense. So she's like, "Yeah, she was fine with it." She's like, "I don't even use these." So
Exactly.
that's why
Yeah.
to lower that limit, that potential that she can loan. Oh, great. Another thing too, what I'm finding is there's a age range in terms of my clientele. There is like the returning nationals, so they tend to be a little bit older, maybe in their 50s or so. And then I have this young tech crowd that's now kind of coming in.
Yes.
Um, what is the I'm assuming, I don't know, there has to be a difference in terms of who is more beneficial age wise, or is there like an age limit that, the banks might look at or age range that it may look at as more preferential?
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's a preferential age. I think we're living in a time where persons are coming in very young. Like sometimes you look at their financial situation and it's like at 32, you have people making some serious
Some
money.
serious bank. I'm like, what am I doing wrong?
Exactly. Right. Because, like recently I worked with a very young entrepreneur, very successful. I think he was like the most he could have been was 35. And we were assessing him for a 13 million
Right.
US mortgage, right? So it really doesn't matter
What?
the age. What I will say is that the banks tend to use the local retirement age 67, or if it is that you can
Okay.
prove that where you are there is a longer retirement for the for the whatever job you're in. So it's either between
Okay.
67 or 70. You tend to find that banks are willing to do this 70 for self-employed persons because you're like me and you, we don't plan to retire
Mhm.
at the 67. We're
Anytime
gonna
soon, we
work
gotta be
hard.
hustling, hustling,
Exactly.
hustling.
We hustling,
Right.
right? So they're
Right.
willing to kind of look at that 70. I
Okay.
have seen places where they go past 70, but that happens when there's income that is very passive. So like if you have investment or maybe you have social security, because I'm dealing with a
Yes.
number of Americans right now, and I have an American who is getting the veteran benefits, but they normally
Okay.
get it right until they go. That is
Yeah.
something that the banks are willing to. Recently, I did a loan for I think he was in his early 60s, and he was a policeman. And he told
Okay.
me policemen in America don't retire, right? So we were able to kind of structure it in that way because we bear in mind that he was in a field that don't necessarily retire at the 67,
That
right?
limit. Right.
Exactly. So it's really by case basis. And if you're working with the bank, it's important that you provide them with as much information as possible on your income and when it stops and when it changes and the impacts it's gonna have. Because remember, the banks are trying to assess you over a very long period of time. And but
Mhm.
the longer you can get the loan for, the lower your monthly payment is. Your cash flow management is better because if you have periods in time when maybe the property is not being rented, but you still have that mortgage payment to pay. You want to be able to manage the entire process, right? So getting as long as possible loan tenor is definitely going to assist with that.
Okay. Um, I just had a question regarding joint loans. So I've had cases where not necessarily husband and wife, but friends or family members trying to come together to do a loan. Have you experienced anything like this with
Yeah, for
non-residents?
sure. Yeah, for sure. We do have. Dealt with a son with parents. I've dealt with a husband with maybe a housewife. One of the
Okay.
advice that I would give is that you work with a bank who allows you to assess the person who's really responsible for the
Possible.
liability, right?
Right, right.
So, for example, if you have a son, like how I had his son and the parents, the bank was willing to assess the son, and then
Mhm.
they just placed the parents on the deeds. So the
Okay.
assessment process was on the son, so you were able to benefit from a longer tenor, in terms of looking strictly. But he has to have the income sufficient on his own to cover the entire mortgage. Same thing with a husband and a wife. If the wife is a housewife, but the husband just wants her on the deeds, then the assessment process can take place only on the husband. And one of the benefits of that is you don't have to go through the intrusive process with the other person. So you don't have to pull the credit
Mhm.
reports and really get into their financial information if it is that the responsibility of the loan amount is with that one individual. So, there are ways to kind of structure it. Normally, I tell clients to make it as clean as possible. It would be nice if if it's placed in a holding company, and
Right.
then everybody has shareholders, like kind of like just if that one person covers the majority of it, then they're holding 75%, the other person's holding
Got
20.
you.
So then when we do the financial statements at the end of the year, it's not that
Yeah.
we have to do everybody's individual personal income tax requirement, but we're just doing the company
The
and we're
companies.
sending the company overall.
Okay. That makes sense. So it's not a case of a guarantor in any way in terms of the, let's say, the husband and wife, or the wife is a housewife, so the income is might not be maybe minimal. He doesn't act as a guarantor for her. It's just a case that the loan actually be in his name, or as you said, in a company name.
Yeah, it
Okay.
could be in his
Although the
name.
title deed,
So, yeah.
right,
So basically, you're assessing his income only for the ability to
right,
qualify for the loan. Anytime
right.
you're placing a property in a holding company and you want the loan to be in the holding company's name, the bank is going to ask you for personal guarantees on yourself because
Okay.
Legally, there is a separation in terms of a company is seen as a separate and distinct person compared to an individual. So if it is that the bank knows that you personally are being assessed for the mortgage, but then you're placing the asset in a holding company's name, what the banks do to tie it together is they will do the loan in the holding company's name, and then they will ask you as the individual to sign as a personal guarantee because ultimately you're
I
responsible for the
see.
loan. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
pretty smart way to do it. So you just mentioned a very interesting thing with the $13 million amount there. I've never heard of. Is that USD?
USD. Yeah, it's USD.
Wow. All right. So what is the like how much I mean, is there a limit? Because now I didn't even know you can even go up to that amount. Is there a limit in terms of how much someone can potentially borrow? What's the typical loan to value ratio?
Loan to value tends to be w- is based on the purchase price, right? So depending on the bank that you're working at, some banks allow you 20% up to about 3 million. And then
Okay.
anything over that, they're gonna ask you for 50%. There are some banks, so you're gonna just have to deal with the specific bank that you're at and find out what the loan to value is. But most of the times, once you're going into those large figures, the banks are going to ask you for 50% financing. And when it comes to maximum, we're working with some Canadian banks that don't have limits. There are some banks that we do work with that do have limits, but overall in Barbados, once you can justify that you can finance the mortgage payment, then you can be assessed for it and qualified for it. There's no real limit. When it comes to a minimum amount, I would say that the only thing that kind of affects what the minimum amount is would depend on paying legal fees for the bank's participation in the transaction. But then I find that we don't really see anything going under 150,000. And that's very dependent because it could be land, right? Which it could be a lot
Yes.
less. So I've
Yes.
seen, I recently did a loan last month for 100,000 Barbados. And so, it's really not a limit. It's really just looking at the specific transaction and then determining what you want as an individual in terms of percentages.
Right. So like a case by case basis, basically on what it is.
Yeah. The only constraints that you have is that obviously if you're the bank that you're working with has a minimum injection amount at 30%, then you
Mm-hmm.
know that the maximum financing you can do on that purchase is 70%, or say
Yeah.
it's 20% and the maximum financing is 80%,
80.
then
Yeah.
some of my clients, they don't even utilize the full 80%. They might say,
Right.
you know what, Sharon, I don't even need 80, give me 70,
Yes.
give me 60.
Yeah.
It's really about a case, but like I mentioned, a case by case basis, and persons looking
Mm-hmm.
at the fact that it might make more sense to finance here if it is that whatever they're taking these funds from, the interest rate returns, it makes sense to them financially,
Yeah.
basically.
Okay. Really is a case by case to look at the entire financial breakdown. I think you would have to, and then you can advise from there.
Yeah, and
You,
remember
you
too,
just you just go ahead.
no, I'm telling you that. Remember too, you have so many other expenses that you have to take into consideration, right? So I
Hmm.
remember meeting with a client last week and she was saying, I feel more comfortable doing 50, although the bank that we were working with were able to give her 80. And I kind of
Hmm.
advised her, I said, listen, let's just look at exactly what you need in terms of financing because you want to do renovations, you have to cover your legal fees, the valuation report. So don't just look at, I have this amount of money to inject into this purchase.
Yeah.
Let's look
Yeah.
at the entire project costs, right? And then
Yes.
determine if you need access to more funds because mortgage financing would tend to be the lowest interest rate you can get. So you want to make
Okay.
sure that you're using that
You
amount
really,
to the
yeah,
best of your
as
ability.
really, yeah, to the best of your abilities. Now that you said that, actually, because there is a difference between the mortgage for the for purchasing the property, and then you also have the if someone's doing renovations, you can also add that to the overall loan, right? What is that called
Yes.
again? There's another, what's that term?
So it's called construction mortgages. It's
There we
like a
go,
bridging
construction
a bridging
mortgages.
facility, right? So
Right.
what you're going to find is if it is that you have a property that has renovations to be done. Maybe the property, I'm just
Mhm.
calling figures, the property is for purchase price 300,000, but then you need renovations of 150,000, then the
Mhm.
entire project cost is really 450,000. So then you have to sit down with the bank now and do the percentages based on the total project costs. So what happens now is that you're going to purchase a property first, and then you're going to go into the renovation side of things. So then there's
Okay.
something called a bridging, where the purchase of the property has taken place, but now you're going to have drawdowns for
Downs for
renovation.
the
Right. And
okay.
that is where most of the times a bank will allow you to pay interest only until the renovations are finished. And then once your
Oh.
renovations are finished, then once you get the certificate of completion from Town Country Planning,
Mhm. Mhm.
extremely important document, uh, banks will then allow you to move from the renovation loan into a full mortgage product.
Okay, and there, I'm assuming, is there a specific timeline that you are given by the bank to work within to complete the renovation? Obviously, you can't keep it extended for a period that you have to have it within whatever amount of time, right? Like the term for
Yeah,
that is different.
sure, for sure. There
Okay.
is a time because obviously the banks are always going to send out their QS quantity surveyors who are
Right.
independent of who you're using to do renovations. And the quantity surveyor is going to, the purpose of that person is to assess the job as an independent person, even outside of the bank or the contractor or whoever is doing it. And they're going to come back and say, this is a reasonable time frame, this is a reasonable cost. This is this is the like expected amount of time that your client will probably be in bridging. Now, remembering that bridging is always viewed as a very high risk period of any property development or purchase or whatever it is. So what you're going to find is most banks charge higher interest during that period. So even for
Okay.
the client is going to want to come out of that period quicker because the
Okay.
interest is higher, right? So for example, you can have a mortgage facility at the same 3.5, but when you're doing construction or the bridging facility, you're paying interest at 6.5. So it's significant. So most clients will the bank does these kind of things to kind of push you to come out of that
Yeah.
renovation period, right? Because a lot of things can go wrong during that time.
During that period. Okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen? I mean, this is like the worst case scenarios here, but have you ever seen a mortgage process start, or just still a mortgage process start and something happens and it falls through? Is it a case that if the facility letter is in place and they pay down their deposit towards to their attorney for the purchase and something falls through with the actual mortgage, is there any financial um implications that the purchaser might incur if they pull out or if something happens
Mhm.
in the middle of the sale of the mortgage process?
Yeah, so I've actually unfortunately been a part of a transaction that happened in
Mhm.
where the bank had done a financing. And then
Mhm.
because the client took so long to come back to the bank, there was a
Mhm.
review process to be done. And
Yes,
the
yes.
person
Mhm.
changed their financial situation so significantly that they then could
Wow.
not re-qualify for the mortgage, right?
Oh my goodness.
So it's a very serious thing, and that's why it's important that you know which bank you're working with and the terms and
Mhm.
conditions of the bank that
Time.
you're working with,
Yes.
because the commitment letter literally tells you the length of time you have before you disburse. You make that first drawdown, right? And if you
Right.
don't do it by that time, a bank can basically say, time has passed. I don't even know if you're the same borrower that we initially issued the commitment letter to. We need to do a
Right.
reassessment. And if at any point you have done something significantly, whether it is purchase of property, you lost your job or whatever, the bank has the right to then withdraw from the transaction because you have changed the terms and conditions of the lending, basically. So, like I mentioned to you, it's a process that you have to really work with somebody who's going to be advising you, and really giving you the best advice. Because the whole thing is that sometimes clients feel, well, I have the commitment letter, so I'm good. No, we need to kind of
Yeah.
push forward and let's get to the point where the loan is
They
this.
kinda take a breath at that time, but no, you gotta keep going.
Yep, you have to keep going for sure. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So in terms of that timeline, let's talk about overall timelines, in terms of securing the facility or commitment letter. Those words are interchangeable, right? The facility and commitment letter, are those the
Yes,
same
they're
thing?
very much
Okay.
interchangeable. Very interchangeable, yeah.
Okay. Right. What is the overall timeline average wise? I've been through this kind of topic before, but coming from you who dealt with different banks and so forth, it'd be interesting to hear, what timeline the clients should expect overall.
A reasonableness in terms of, well, let's talk about in terms of the client's profile. So if you're dealing with
Hmm.
a salaried client, which is a very straightforward profile, you're looking at salary versus debt. The analysis should take place relatively quickly. So I've found that, like with me, I normally pre-qualify my clients, but pre-qualification comes with its limitations, right? Because if the client, like, some clients want to get pre-qualified and they're not pulling that credit report. So what they're doing is they're asking you to pre-qualify them based on what they tell you. So then if you pull the credit report and it's a lot more than what they say, then the pre-qualification amount changes, right? But the pre-qualification process, once it's transparent and the client provides all needed information, income versus expenses, you can get pre-qualification with in a day, 24 hours, right? When it comes to the actual mortgage process for a salaried person, you should at least get some feedback from your bank within at least a minimum of 7 to 10 business days. If you're looking at at a business owner, you're gonna it's a little bit more complex because you're looking at not just income from you, but you're looking at the financial statements of the business, and it becomes a lot more of a broader assessment. So that may take about 15 days, right? When once the loan is approved, sometimes there's some banks that gives you something called approval in principle, and then you have to go out and get the valuation report. Depending on who you work with, valuation report can be done in 5 to 7 business days. Once you
Hmm.
get that, then the commitment letter is normally issued very quickly afterwards in about 2 or 3 days. Business days, you get
Okay.
the commitment letter. Now, I've heard horror stories where persons will be waiting at a bank for like 6 months and 9 months. And then even sometimes I hear like clients losing properties because they're waiting on
Yeah.
the bank and the bank hasn't gotten back to them and they don't know what to do, right? From the time you're with a bank and they have not provided you with any type of feedback within at least a 2 to 3 week period, I would say that you
Hmm.
should start shopping around, right? I think that
Okay.
I think a lot of clients, they think that they have to stay with a bank because they started the process.
Started the
But
process.
sometimes it just gets worse, right? And that's one of the benefits of working with us because we're a
Yeah.
broker. So we don't just work with one bank. We normally take your profile and we then shop it around to the different banks that we work in, obviously within confidentiality terms and conditions. And then we basically get back to you pretty quickly and say, listen, this bank is willing to do X, this bank is not willing to do it. You let us know what you want us to do. And we get back to clients very quickly because one of the things that we move with is if we can't do it, we let you know so that if it is that you have to change the property that you're looking at or bring a bigger injection amount, those things are known very early up in the process, right? But I
Yeah.
will
It's not
tell you
wasting
that.
anybody's time.
Exactly. And I mean, even as
Hmm.
a realtor, you know it, right? Sometimes you have clients
Yeah.
who will literally sign an offer and acceptance letter, and then you're just now waiting, thinking that the property sale is going through, when really
Going
it
through.
isn't,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
it's a waste of time for the
Often.
client and for you. Yeah. So the
Yeah.
quicker that you
Yeah.
can get that approval is so important. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's good for someone like you because there have been instances I have had it several times too where we would be waiting to hear back from the bank and we literally just don't hear anything. I've had a client who actually lost out on a property just like that as well, just waiting to hear back from the bank for the final approval. And the vendor just did not want to wait any further. They waited already. So having you there would be like, yeah, no, times shift. At least you can kind of step in at that point as the true and trusted person on the client side. I don't know.
Yes.
It's not to say that the banks are not on the client side, but you know what I mean. Like sometimes having that person, that third party, is really, really important as well as an agent to try to
Yeah.
push it along as best as possible.
Yeah. But recently I had an
Yeah.
experience where a realtor that we work with pretty closely, she came and she said that she
Mhm.
had a client who was at another bank and the client was waiting for 6 months only to hear at the end of the 6 months that the loan was declined.
Mhm.
Right.
Oh my
So
goodness.
that was kind of heartbreaking because the seller was also holding the property. The buyer
Yeah.
was already kind of like, had their mind that they were doing it. They just thought that they were waiting, right? They didn't
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
the bank could come back and decline. And what we did is that we kind of stepped in, we reviewed the application, we kind of addressed some concerns that the bank may have had, and we kind of carried it to a bank that had a risk appetite for that type of transaction. We got the
Right. Right.
commitment letter in the client's hand within 3 business days, right?
Wow.
So the what I tell clients is I need your support in order to make these
Mhm.
turnarounds happen, because being very transparent, sometimes a client would tell you that a bank is holding them up. And then when you check with the bank, it's because they haven't
Yeah.
submitted something
Missing
or they have,
information. Yes.
yeah, missing information. And really
Yeah.
and truly, it's the client who's contributing to the delays.
To the
But
entire
if that
delay.
is,
Yes.
yeah, but if that is not present and it is just the bank who's holding up the transaction, then that's when I
Mhm.
tell clients, you need to make a choice. You need to basically say, you know what? I'm moving on to another bank that's going to take my business a lot more serious.
Yeah. That is. That happens. It happens way too often. I'm so happy that someone that you have stepped into this field with a mortgage as a mortgage broker to really put things in place and alignment, because it's a very frustrating process
It is.
for the purchaser. A lot of times too, because you know their expectations. This is why I was saying managing expectations is the first thing I always say. Like, look, it's not the same process as in the UK or the States or in Canada. It is a 2 to 3 week minimum for like the first responses. So you've got
Yeah.
to really be prepared and really willing to go through the process. But
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure
It's
with
true.
you in place now, it'll be a lot more streamlined. I'm hoping.
Yes, yeah, for
I'm
sure. I
hopeful.
mean, yeah, even in terms of the banks that we deal with, we constantly give them
Hmm.
feedback. We let them know where we think
Yeah.
improvements could be made. And it's a good thing in terms of the fact that the banks that have chosen to work with us have been so open to adjusting, because they realize
Nice.
in order to
Yeah.
adjust, you're going to get more business, right? Because the core
Yeah.
business of any bank is loans. Like you
Exactly.
can't get away from it, right? It's like you need
Yeah.
to adjust your internal processes to make sure that that product, which contributes to the majority of your income,
Majority of your yes is
it's
actually
making
functional
sense, right?
and makes sense. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's so important. I meet with leaders regularly and we kind of like discussing
Hmm.
where could we have done this better? Where could we, if a transaction, and then even in terms of dealing with clients, sometimes I get
Yeah.
feedback, whether it's a frustration from the realtor point of view. And I go back to the banks and I say, listen, can we review this
Yeah.
aspect of it that's frustrating my clients? Because what role I'm hoping I know I'm playing is kind of
Hmm.
like representing the clients and the voice that they have. Because remember, a lot of our clients, there are international clients, they're accustomed to certain things. And when they come
Exactly.
into Barbados, even the account opening process is a shocking process to most
Yeah.
persons, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you have to hold their hands, because sometimes a transaction is declined not just because your client is a bad client in terms of a credit
No.
profile, but it's just because they
Hmm.
approached the wrong bank, right? So that's why it's
Yes.
so important that you kind of meet with a broker. And I think the concept of brokers for Americans, Canadians, and UK clients is so
Hmm.
familiar. Like they know what a broker
Yes,
play.
it's something that's in the market. It's been there a long time. Yeah.
Yep. So they know. So you don't have to sell, or you don't have to sell our, we hardly ever have to sell our services, right? Because they know
Yeah.
the value that we bring. So definitely I think that, it's kind of holding the banks accountable too as well, because we
Yeah.
want to also, we're in this together. We want the industry to just, function better, because this is a form of income for Barbados too as well, foreign investment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just about to say that, yeah, that feedback from the client or the realtor, I feel like sometimes it falls on deaf's ear because you're kind of repeating yourself because the process would happen again. You kind of go through the exact same thing, and I'm like, it's such a, it's almost a daunting process to be quite honest. I've had one or two that were pretty decent. I won't tell a lie on that, but like I really just want to make sure my clients are prepared beforehand because a lot of them just like I've been waiting for 3 months. I can't hear back anything. Like we haven't gone disbursement. I've been waiting. Um, so I'm happy to hear that you actually sit down with the people who are responsible for the internal processes, as you say, to elevate because it's time. Like Barbados, it's time.
Yeah,
Like
it
we have
is.
people
It
coming here
is.
who are wanting to spend money and put money into the economy, and it's almost
Yep.
like I had a client literally explain to me that they felt like they were begging to give their money, and I was like, yeah, no, just bear with me, please. Just give us a few, and
Yeah,
it's
it's
yeah,
really
yeah.
it's true. I met with a client just last week. She told me that she was trying to
Mhm.
call a loans officer, and she's now been waiting 2 months for him to call her back. Right, and I think a part of it too is being very transparent. Non-resident
Mhm.
financing is complex. It's not
Yes.
simple, right? You as a loans officer, you're going to be exposed to an international tax return, an international credit report. Their credit reports look nothing like ours. So if it is that you have somebody coming into the bank and the loans officer that they're dealing with don't have that experience with international
Right.
clients, then that's where the challenge comes, right? Because we as human beings, we tend to like to be in our comfort zone. So give me a
Yeah.
local person to assess, and I can do it pretty
You
quickly.
got it sorted.
Then, yeah,
Yeah.
I got that sorted. But a non-resident financing person, sometimes,
Yeah.
especially if they are business owners, some
Mhm.
some structures are so complex, from trusts to flowing through another external company, and really trying
Yeah.
to get to the real source of the income. That in itself can take quite some time. I had a client once who gave me a flow chart just to show where the money was going, because
How it was
that was
coming
how,
through.
yeah, that is how complex this structure is, right? So, like it's that's why it's so important that when they come into Barbados, that they're placed with persons who
The
understand
right first time.
international
Yeah, yeah.
financing. Yeah.
So with these clients, obviously they live overseas. They can't always get here. How easy is the process for them to do it from their home?
So the entire mortgage process can actually be done remotely. I meet with most of my clients via Zoom, WhatsApp. I do whatever I have to do in order to get the information I need. You can send it through secured links in terms of your documents to me. The
Mhm.
difference is that there are one or two banks that we work with where the account opening process, the client has
Mhm.
to do that in person. So they have to sign, because it's like a legal document, right? That's governing a lot of the transfer of funds and those sort of things. So the bank may
Right.
say at that time, and the mortgage is already approved. It's just that you're
Right.
coming in now to open the bank accounts. And that's the only thing that we
Okay.
kind of have to sensitize our clients to, because then we tell them that if you have to come in to sign for the account opening process, then you
Mhm.
try to come in and you do a lot more during that visit to get things moving. But at least by the time we get to that time, the mortgage is
Mhm.
already fully approved. It's just that
Right.
you're coming to just sign up documents.
Do the
So the
signature. Yeah.
entire mortgage process up to approval, the valuation reports and everything, we act on your behalf on as on the island, and we get the
Mhm.
valuation reports completed, we get it paid for, and then once the client has a commitment letter, at that time, sometimes a bank does
Mhm.
require they come in person to sign.
Okay. All right. What is your over overview or perspective in terms of financing for non-residents in the Caribbean? So we just talked about Barbados and how there is a lot of space for us to improve. What do you see for the future for Barbados and the Caribbean, especially now with things like I don't know if you recall the current open of borders is it the CARICOM nationals?
Yes.
Do you see something positive coming about from that? How do you think it's going to impact financing?
Well, I mean, n- when you have overseas investors, it's going to affect your property sales, right? Your prices are going to be a lot higher because these persons are coming into the market with a lot more buying power than, say, the locals. And I think that's the only level of concern that I might have in terms of the fact that you still want local Barbadians being able to afford homes. And I think that is being addressed because there are certain places like Atlantic Breeze that you can get a property for like
Yes.
345,000 house and land. Then there's
Barbados.
Eastern,
Yeah.
yeah, Barbados. Then there's Eastern Land Development projects that
Mhm.
usually come out, and I've seen persons get properties for like 220,000. So I think that there is the country in itself is trying to protect Barbadians from still owning a piece of the rock, basically, right?
Right. Right.
Obviously, with persons coming in, you're going to find that certain property prices, rental expenses are going to be affected, but I don't see
Mhm.
that we can get away from it, right? Barbados is part of a global economy. Like, you can't say, well, we just Barbados, let's just stay on our
Yeah,
own.
I can't send a bubble. Yeah.
Bahamas is doing it, Cayman is doing it. These people are allowing persons to come in and purchase properties. It's the same kind of concept, right? So if you have persons from CARICOM coming in and purchasing
Mhm.
property, it's the other way around too. Barbadians can go over there too and purchase property as well and do investments and open up opportunities, right? I do think that there is a need to continue to protect the Barbadians so that we can continue to
Mhm.
afford housing on the island,
Yeah.
right? But investments from overseas is something that we need to as well, right? Because we
To
need
absolutely
foreign
have.
exchange, right?
Yeah.
So we have to have it. It's just a balance. And I think so far we've been doing pretty well with that balance. When it comes to banking, I think this international market space is pushing a lot of institutions to become a lot more, I would say, creative in terms of their lending. So you do have some financial institutions that are now looking at interest-only mortgages with lump sum payments throughout the year, those kind of things, because
Mhm.
you have to kind of mirror what these customers are accustomed to and
Clients
what
are custom. Yeah.
exactly,
They're more
right? So
flexible options available to them. Yeah.
exactly. And then even digitalizing stuff, right? Like we work with a bank that everything is digital, right? So you can do
Mhm.
everything on your phone. You can open a bank account on your phone. You can, so
Right.
it's really forcing them to, adjust, right? Because
Yeah.
you need to, and I think it will benefit Barbadians as well too, because as we become more busier, we need banking to come almost to our doors, right? So if it's happening for them, then it can happen for us too as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're coming close to the end of our line of questions here. You mentioned basically having the right people and the right timing as one of the most important elements when it comes to purchasing in Barbados. What should someone avoid? What other mistakes or what mistakes can someone avoid? When they're actually looking to purchase here or get a mortgage here in Barbados.
Okay, so one of the things is, making sure that you work first with a realtor, just like yourself, who have experience with international sales, right? It's like I mentioned at the beginning, is a specialist
Mm-hmm.
area. It's not
Yeah.
something that anybody can just say, well, let me do one sale this year or something. You have
Yeah.
the tendency to miss things if you don't have experience in it, right? And I know you have had years of experience in selling and you're kind of guiding the clients because an international client is not the same as a local client. You're going to find that
Yeah.
international clients want to know what the returns on the property is. It's a lot
Yep.
more complex in terms of the purchase, right? So definitely
Mm-hmm.
first working with a good and experienced realtor like yourself, we cannot
Mm-hmm.
overemphasize the importance of that because on top of that too, you want to come in and you want to be able to be shown exactly all of your options on the island so you make the best choice that for you,
Decision. Yep.
right? So then that
Yes.
comes hand in hand with pre-qualification, right? So when you find your realtor, you want to next find your finance person. You want to make sure that your
Mm-hmm.
finance person tells you what I would qualify for on the island. So then once you know that figure, you go back to your realtor. Your realtor now can literally give you a portfolio of options based
Yep.
on that amount And it makes the process a lot more smoother because now when you find a property that you love, you can almost automatically walk in and say, listen, this is what I have. You've already started the process because to get pre-qualified, you have to still give a certain level of information, and then you make the process easier. Another key person is an attorney. You have to work with attorneys that understand international purchases. A
Yeah.
simple concept as registering your funds. I have seen so
Yep.
many transactions
So many
where
missed. Yeah.
the funds are not registered, and that is such a major thing to miss, right? Because you want to make sure that you register all the funds coming into the island. So if you're looking to sell in a couple of years, you
Years
can
time.
easily call on
Mhm.
that registration to take the funds out of the island, right? That's
Yeah.
something that not all attorneys appreciate and will put in place for international buyers. And then on terms of even attorneys understanding the fact that their client might not be on island, that in itself is something that they have to maneuver and manage, where they're willing to send documents
Mhm.
overseas, they get notarized, it comes back in via
Documents
FedEx.
overseas.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the attorney moves fast, right? Because sometimes I find an attorney will go on
Yes.
vacation and the entire transaction is halted, right? If you
Entire
are,
sale holdout. Yeah, it's crazy.
yep, yep. So if you are a buyer and you're looking to work with an attorney, have that conversation with them. Say, listen, if I find a property in
Yeah.
June, how soon do you think you can close my transaction? And the attorney should be able to give timeline. And obviously, I'm not forgetting that there are other players in this transaction. So you have the vendor's attorney, you might have the bank's attorney, but that's
Yeah.
where everybody kind of cohesively sits down and says, let's try to close this transaction. I did one recently where that happened. The attorney for the bank, the attorney for the vendor, and the attorney for the buyer basically came together and said, let's close this transaction in 6 weeks. And it was done, right? So it's about everybody kind of working together to get things done
Yeah.
because I've heard some serious horror stories. You have persons paying deposits and years later transaction not being closed because the realtor working with the vendor didn't check to see that they were title deeds. So sometimes
Oh dear.
we're unfortunately in a market where a lot of things are still manual. So if something is
Yes.
missing, to recreate it is madness, right? So you can have
Yeah.
a case where you love a property, you're committed to it, your sales 10% is out there. But then when you're going through the process now, you realize your vendor can't get tax clearances,
Yeah.
the deeds aren't available. Sometimes as, crazy, the property might still be in an estate trying to go through the administrative
Go through.
process.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
All of these things is things that when you work with an experienced realtor, the realtor is supposed to be able to siphon through when they're buying properties and ensuring that they're
Yeah.
bringing things to you that make sense because time is money. You don't want that
Yeah.
you're gonna, like a property, your deposit is out there and any transaction can't close.
Can't close because it's held up. Yeah. 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 So yeah, I completely agree with you. Having a good real estate agent, having the right attorney, and now obviously having now the a mortgage broker. These are the powerhouse teammates, basically, that would
Yep.
really champion you and you and the entire sale to make sure it completes in a reasonable and time frame and everything goes as smoothly as it
Yeah.
should go.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So if you were to summarize, because we went through a lot just now, as a financial advisor, mortgage broker, how is it that you would say is the best way that you can help non-residents with their financing terms and the overall mortgage process?
Well, we've gone through quite a bit of effort to have a lot of information out there on the net. So we have
Mhm,
our website, www.tropicalfinancebroker.com. We have a
mhm.
YouTube channel where we produce videos where we're kind of like just breaking down different
Down
terms.
everything.
Yeah, I've
Mhm,
done free seminars which I've recorded and kind of uploaded to YouTube so that persons, because
mhm.
sometimes people learn in different ways, right? And at different,
Ways, yes.
right? So if you're somebody who needs to see it on video, we're on YouTube. If you're somebody who needs to read it and physically touch it on a piece of paper, I'm on LinkedIn. I've wrote over 1,000 articles on just real estate in Barbados and finance, right? So you can definitely pull things from there. I know you two have quite a bit of information on the net for
Yeah.
non-residents to read. I would say that, I think people are more open to providing the needed information. It's just
Mhm.
for the non-resident to kind of like, if you're coming into the market and you're really trying to
Yeah.
understand, to kind of just source the information. It's there, it's online, it's on videos. I mean, even this discussion that we're doing right now, you having this discussion too would open up their minds too as well to some of the potential issues that they may have looking to purchase because they honestly don't know. They don't know. They
Yeah,
don't know
yeah.
what to ask. They don't know what to expect. And it's discussions like this that's going to really inform. And I can tell you from the time I entered banking to now,
Mhm.
even we as bankers, we've become so creative, right? Because in the past, a banker would have never done a podcast or a YouTube
Never.
channel, or even
Unheard
have
of.
an Instagram page or
Yeah.
like I have a LinkedIn page where a number of my clients contact me through. These are things that never occurred in the past, right? And I think that
Mhm.
it really speaks to the Barbados market trying to expand and come up to date with what's going on. And I'm for sure supporting it because I think that's the way to go for sure.
Perfect. All right. So, Sharianne, I want to thank you so much. I just want to say if there's anything else you want to add that you think is important that we might have missed along the way, you can definitely take your time now and go through.
Yeah. No, I think you covered it really well. Your questions were very broad. It allowed me to answer more than sometimes the question was, just to kind
Yes,
of
exactly.
so definitely think that you covered it really well with the questions that you asked me, and I am still available if it is that every non-resident situation is special, right? It's
Mhm.
particular. It's you. It's like you have to
Yes.
kind of get in front. So if it is that you, after listening to this video, you still feel as if there's a question that you need
Yeah.
answered,
Trust me.
then yeah,
My
you
brain will be sleeping on this tonight because my brain will pop up like, oh wait, what about this? What about this? And
yep,
yeah, I'm sure you'll
yep.
be happy to address it for me.
For sure, right? So I can be reached very easily on WhatsApp. My number 836-1234. And you can literally message me with any type of specific scenario for you. But to kind of go through every single thing, this podcast
Yeah.
will be long.
I know. I try to keep it as succinct as possible, but it's a wealth of information. I'm sure we can break it out. Both of us can break it out to assist our clients.
Exactly.
But thank you so much, Sherry Ann from Tropical Finance. I'm going to also link your YouTube and your website and your contact information on once I actually post this.
Yes.
And I just want to say thank you so much, and I really look forward to our continued work together.
Yes, and thank you too as well. Thank you for the opportunity. And I love what you're doing in this space. Like when I Googled, non-resident financing, you're actually on the first page and it's pretty
Oh,
impressive.
amazing!
Like definitely
Yeah, small
wishing,
small team marketing.
yes. And I'm wishing you all the success for 2025 winter season. All right.
Thank you so, so much. All right. Well, I wish you a good day and we will touch base soon. All the
All
best.
right.
Speak to you
Bye.
soon. See ya. Bye
Bye.
bye.